Title, I have to say. It's a nice title.
Yeah, I'm here now with Keela Robinson, the VP of Product Innovation at Netflix. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Keela, tell the audience a little bit about who you are. We're gonna go into the whole journey, but what's the kind of quick summary before we get into it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm really lucky. I've got an amazing job. I think it's an amazing job, and I get to run member product innovation at Netflix. And let's see. I mean, I've been doing product like my almost my entire career, 20 plus years now, which is kind of boggles my mind. But I think it's one of the best jobs in the world, and I feel very lucky to be able to do this in my career. And live in the Bay Area now, although I spent about 20 years or so in Seattle and really enjoyed that. And but have been here for the last few years at Netflix. And yeah, I'm a mom. I've got two boys who are now 13 and 15, so they keep me busy. And yeah, so can't wait to get into the conversation.
I just got before the show started. I just heard my wife yell to me that my 14-year-old son forgot his cleats at home, and it's crucial that I go bring them to him. And I was like, no, this is a life lesson he's going to have to learn because Dad's got a live stream.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I am regularly surprised by the types of basic things in life that I must remind my kids about. But I'm kind of hoping eventually they'll be able to manage on their own. We'll see.
I really hope so. I really hope so. Well, tell me a little bit about like the early career. I'm guessing when you were in college, there wasn't a product management major. Like, how did you end up
Oh
doing
no.
product? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not. Look, it was really interesting, right? So I like to joke that I was raised by a pack of developers. My mom and dad both were software developers, and even my older brother, whom you know actually,
Mm-hmm.
sort of dabbled in tech throughout high school. And I kind of fashioned myself a little bit, like I learned to code enough
Mm-hmm.
to get by. But I was like, nah, it's not my thing. Like just kind of sit, I don't envision myself doing software engineering long term. And went to college at Stanford. And while I was there, like the internet basically started to emerge, which
Mm.
was like super exciting to see. And I saw first web browser, and I started like setting up websites, and I like
Mm-hmm.
set up some departmental websites for some of the departments I was studying with, and I just loved it, right? And I was like, this is great. And I lucked out, and I got an internship with Sun Microsystems, which was one of the early companies in terms of leaders on the internet, now owned by Oracle, I'm pretty sure. And that's what exposed me to the role of what they called, I think, a business manager at the time. And I got to basically, I was sort of like assisting in that capacity. And I thought, like, oh man, this is great. This is an amazing job. But I realized very quickly, I mean, I was still in college at the time, that I didn't know what I was talking about. So I went into management consulting for a few years, figure I want to get some of the tools around opportunity sizing and figuring
Mm-hmm.
out how to present and do some models forecasting. Like I figured that would come in handy, and indeed it really has. But I was so itching to get back into technology and kind of that side of technology where we can help to influence like what the product might look like. So I joined a company named Real Networks back in 1998, I think. So still super early days on the internet, and they were doing audio and video, like really interesting live broadcasts and and streaming. And I loved it. It was a great ride there in sort of internet V1, and did that for about 6 years or so, actually. Yeah.
That must have been amazing because I remember, yeah, the real player. That was the only way to watch videos, and then later it was like you could choose with Windows Media Player as well. But
Yeah.
that was what was that like? You were kind of in the very you got to see firsthand the development of the internet. Working at at Sun, the dot in .com, they used to say, right?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
um,
I mean,
yeah.
it really felt so unformed at the time. It was
Mm-hmm.
like we didn't know what kind of digital rights management what might be happening, right? Everybody was battling to have
Mm-hmm.
their formats win out.
Right.
Ultimately, open formats did a lot better. But yeah, like it felt like there were just major make or break type of game changing shifts in the market very regularly. And so it was a thrill ride for sure. I mean, it just like, really keeps you on your toes and you're constantly having to like sort out, okay, now we've got this new thing called an iPod. Now what do we do? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And having to pivot a lot was a really fun environment to be in, really, really high learning, high growth. And I loved a lot of the people that I was working with early on and still keep in touch, which is great.
Now the big thing, people are talking about Web3 or the metaverse and blockchain and all this stuff. Do you feel like these kind of technology shifts, do they look similar to you, or do you think they've been very different in terms of what it means for a product manager and leading a business?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they've been different. I think they've got a lot of potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look, how long have we been talking about virtual reality? How long have we been talking about some of these concepts have been around for a while, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
the burning member, or I say member because I'm constantly thinking about Netflix members. The burning consumer need and benefit is not as clear, right?
Mm.
And so whereas at the time, like super early on the internet, we were solving some really crazy important and never really addressed consumer needs that I think really caused adoption to take off. I mean, you think about early days of commerce,
Mm-hmm.
sites like Expedia, which I eventually worked at and whatnot, that like they were solving really nasty pain points, saving a lot of money, saving a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
time, like doing things that are like fairly foundational to what consumers want. Whereas I feel like some of the stuff that we're talking about now is in the potentially more in the camp of a vitamin, not a pill,
Mm.
and in terms of customer needs and jobs to be done. Now, having said that, I personally am super interested in autonomous vehicles and you know and the impacts there because again I see like very significant changes in lifestyle and consumer benefits there.
Now, at some point, you also got to work at another very kind of iconic tech company at Amazon,
I did.
and
Yeah.
they're known for a very specific culture and values. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, it was also pretty interesting, kind of kind of a crazy experience. So I was brought on in under the veil of secrecy. I didn't know what I was going to be working on there,
Oh, one of
which
those projects.
yeah, it happens every once in a while, right? But like it was somebody I'd worked with before, and exciting space. And I come on board, and in true Amazon fashion, they do their working backwards model, right?
Hmm.
So I get to read the press release of the product
Right.
that I am to work on, which was exciting, although it was 7 pages long. It was a pretty dense press release.
Mm.
And indeed, that perhaps was one of the first things that was an interesting signal to me as to what was to be ahead of me. But yeah, I worked on the Fire phone, right, which was kind of a big disaster for Amazon. It's they've moved on to bigger and better things. But I worked on that for its first like year and a half
Mm.
of formation as a team, as a concept. But then they went on to subsequently work on it for another couple of years after I'd left, before it released. But the early days were phenomenal because we were exploring like all of these really cutting edge out there technologies, going to,
Hmm.
like MIT Media Lab just to see what they were up to and some of
Mm.
their really like, yeah, pushing the envelope in terms of what hardware and software combined can do together. And it was that same group that ended up kind of working on Alexa, that ended up working on Fire TV, and a whole bunch of things that were, quite successful. So definitely felt like more of an incubation labs type environment, and yeah, super interesting, and a really great opportunity to get to experience the aspects of Amazon's culture that you're right are super strong, right? That it is absolutely part of when you're there, and especially if you like buy into it, it is day to day. The types of
Yeah.
language you use, the types of behaviors that you have is very much driven by the culture.
Yeah, one of my good friends has been there for a long time, and I mean he really lives those values, and it's very much like in his DNA now, and I don't know if he'll ever be separated from those values.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Actually, I mean, in my experience, I think that Netflix and Amazon share a lot of values.
Hmm.
And then, although I would say that one that is quite central at Netflix that I didn't experience as much at Amazon is around what we call context, not control. So, sort of pushing decisions as low as you can in the organization to let people have the autonomy to make those decisions. So it's a
Hmm.
leader's job to provide context, but not control. That I think is a little bit different than at companies like Amazon and, from what I understand, Apple, where the very senior leadership team are pretty intimately involved in the major decisions in terms of what's going on with the products and the business.
Were you able to observe any of sort of Jeff Bezos's leadership kind of style, and what was it like?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there long enough to really like be able to comment with great accuracy, but I definitely was in several meetings with Jeff, and
Hmm.
I found him to be really, really a good guy. Like his laugh is incredible. It is like almost overwhelming, and he lights up the room. And he's super engaged. Obviously, incredibly smart. One of the things I observed him doing that I have tried to model, and I think is a really good practice, is when you do have so much influence, and in his role, control as well, you have to be careful that you don't surround yourself with sycophants.
Mm.
And so one of the things I saw him doing that I thought was really effective was after, so Amazon culture is you come into a meeting and you read the memo in silence together. That's a little bit awkward when you wrote the memo because you're just sitting there like rereading your own memo, and like, do I put
Yeah.
margin notes? I don't know. Anyway, so after you read the memo, then he would ask everybody else to kind of go around the room and offer their opinions, and then he would chime in with his,
Mm.
because the risk is, if you end up being,
Yeah.
the more powerful person in the room and you speak up too early, that everybody else wants to snap to your opinion. And I think that could be, I thought that was a very smart thing for him to do.
One of the things that sometimes people ask me for advice, and they're like, "Oh, I have this offer to work on this project, and it's the CEO themselves are very passionate about it." And I always often tell them like, "Well, that's a double-edged sword.
It
Like
is.
you're gonna see how the CEO thinks, but you might not be the product manager that you might be on another, feature where you can make more of the calls." And was wondering like, what was that like? I'm obviously he cared deeply about the Fire Phone and
Yeah,
and
right. And I totally agree with you. And it's also the same reason why, if I'm approached for an opportunity around a founder-led
Mhm.
company where the founder was the original product person, I'm like, okay, I'll think about that. But I'm not inclined, right? Because they're going to
Yeah.
be like super involved. And it is one of these things that, I love working on projects where I can, see my fingerprints on what's been built. I know that I had an influence. And I think on the types of projects where you've got multiple layers of sort of executives that are looking to weigh in, that becomes less and less likely, as a product person, to be able to have that kind of influence.
Mhm.
So yeah, he was super involved.
Yeah.
I think he cares, and I'm sure, obviously that doesn't scale to everything that Amazon does, but he has particular projects, I'm sure, that he gets more engaged with than others, or at least used to, of course. Now
Right.
he's not as involved in operations.
Yeah. He's got other endeavors. So tell me a little bit about, were there things that you learned at Amazon that you still apply today, or some things that you kind of observed that you thought, oh yeah, I'm going to add this to my toolkit?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think there are very few other companies in the world that demonstrate as consistently the customer centricity that Amazon does, right? It
Mm,
really is central to their philosophy and saying, like, and wanting to take a long view toward customer value. So I have the Amazon credit card, and I'm pretty sure they lose money on that. Like, I'm quite certain with the amount of things I buy from
yeah,
Amazon and the 5% discount I get on
5%
that
exactly.
alone, right? Like, I'm quite sure that it's a long-term play, right? It's a long-term play tour, and they make sure that, like, all of those experiences are going to be really delightful for me, and that they'll be looking out for their customers. And I just think it takes such patience and willingness to manage Wall Street and so forth, right? To be able to say, like, we're in this for the long haul, and we believe that, like, whenever we're in doubt, do what's best for the customer, right? And the customer gets a seat at the table, at the virtual conversation. I think that that's super powerful. They have several other of their leadership competencies that I'm a big fan of, like disagree but commit, right? It's
Hmm.
super important that you get a robust conversation. You're able to understand alternative perspectives and different pros and cons to arguments, and thus make a decision. I think but you get behind the decision once it's made. And then I have to say that between Amazon and Netflix, I'm a huge proponent of the memo as an approach as opposed to slides, because I
Mm,
think you can kind of gloss over things with slides. You've got bullets. It really comes down to how persuasive or influential is the presenter. And in a memo, you don't get to hide that much, right? It's all out there.
hmm.
It's fantastic for inclusion in terms of being able to have people in different locales comment and really see and participate in the conversation that might happen. At least we use Google for those types of memos, and you could do some great collaboration with that. And then I also think that it really presses somebody against our own natural confirmation bias. So, product people are not immune to this. Lots of people have this effect where we like to find a solution quickly and then see all available evidence as confirming our conclusion
Hmm.
and our
Hmm.
solution. So when you end up writing a memo, you need to be transparent about what are the other alternatives out there. What are the things that the team considered in making this decision and making this recommendation, and what are some of the pros and cons, to be transparent about that. And I think that process alone is really improves the decision making process.
This reminds me of actually a discussion I was having in my day job just a few hours ago around um, escalations.
Mm-hmm.
When teams disagree on something. And I was curious, you mentioned the disagree and commit and the use of memos. How have you seen sort of the escalation process for when there's disagreements work at the various companies that you've been at, in terms of what you think works well?
Yeah. I mean, there are all types of models that work, that can work in that situation. I think the least effective is a consensus-based culture and model, because
Mm,
it takes so long, and usually one's choices end up getting really watered down. And you end up not being able to be truly innovative or bold, because you're trying to kind of hedge across everybody's risks and concerns.
mhm, mhm,
So, having said that, I'm a big fan of either role-based authority, or something along the lines of what we call at Netflix sort of informed captainship. So that's saying, you know we need to be able to have a decision maker, somebody who is, given the authority to make that decision. It is their obligation to farm for dissent, to hear alternative opinions, to try to prove themselves wrong, and to make sure that they've made a balanced decision. But nonetheless, they get to make the call, right? And so, in that model, though, you have to have trust in the individual who's making the call, and some form of accountability down the road, that, like, hey, if they consistently make bad calls, I mean, everybody's going
mhm.
to make bad calls every once in a while, right? Like, that happens. We need to be able to fail. But if you consistently fail to take in feedback from others, or consistently are expressing bad judgment, it's you're probably in the wrong job, right? You're probably not meant for that role,
Hmm.
or that authority, that responsibility you've been given.
Well, after your time at Amazon, eventually you, I think, took your first CEO role at Urban Spoon, and I'm
That's right.
curious about that transition from product to kind of more of a overall, general manager or chief executive role. What was that like for you?
It was a great opportunity. I loved it. I loved leading a small business, right? So we had about 60 people at the time or
Hmm.
so, like not a big company, right? And yet, tens of millions of customers every month, people who were using the service. And so,
Yeah, I remember using it.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
fun. It was a
Hmm.
lot of fun, and I love the team as well. There's something quite nice, I have to say, about a GM or CEO type role where you're not just working on product, but where
Hmm.
you also get to pull some other strings because they go in concert together, right? Like marketing and product kind of need to go together.
Hmm.
And operations and product kind of need to go together. And so there are some times where you can make some trade-offs between them, or even better, like be really aligned in what you're trying to accomplish, what your strategy is and what you're trying to accomplish, that allows, that when you're able to kind of express that not only in the product but in these other aspects of how a company operates, it really can be an accelerant, to the business.
What was that like, leading a team where you had a head of product reporting to you and you weren't running product? Did you feel like it
Yeah.
was hard to?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, probably a better question for Mindy, who's in that role. And she and I look. I mean, we had a great time working together, and she ended up working with me at another company as well, at Expedia. So that was it's difficult, right, to realize that like you don't get to make the calls that you're used to making. But on the other hand, I would like to believe that I was able to demonstrate a lot more empathy for the role, and just in general also like understanding the development process, understanding how long things take, or where complexity is introduced in a process. I think sometimes when you've got leaders who do not come from any sort of product background, they have a really hard time understanding like, why is it always taking so long, right? This is just software. But like, I saw a demo of it 2 months ago. Why isn't it done? Right? The danger of demos. So from that perspective, I think I was helpful in being able to really kind of help narrow down into like what are the most important things for us to work on in order to pursue the strategy that we wanted to do to grow the business.
What was the hardest thing transitioning from a pure product role to the CEO role? Like, clearly you understood the product person's point of view very well. What was the biggest stretch for you?
Well, the area that um, I was most nervous about was engineering management, right? Like that's an
Mm,
area that even though I'd done some coding, it was
right.
like a long time ago. And I, I was nervous that I lacked credibility, that I lacked
Mm,
the ability to actually do that thing. Interestingly, in my first 6 years when I was at Real Networks, early days, it was so chaotic that every 6 to 9 months there was some sort of reorg, and I would oftentimes end up going out of product management for a little while. And I do like international marketing, or I
mm,
do business development type stuff, or and I tried my hand at different types of disciplines. It was a great opportunity to be able to like, yeah, just try out different things and get to know that discipline well enough that I would be able to, when it came time to do so, when I was a CEO, I was able to lead those and feel fairly grounded in them. I never felt like entirely grounded as an engineering leader, because I knew that push comes to shove, I can't actually like do the work, right?
mm,
So in that regard, that was what was key. There was finding an engineering counterpart, a leader on my team who I could really trust, who knew
mhm.
that I was, that I was leaning on them, and considering them a key part of the leadership team. So that was probably the biggest stretch.
So many of us in product view the relationship with our end counterparts as one of the most important. What were some of the kind of approaches you've developed over your career in terms of how to build a successful partnership with engineering?
Yeah, I think foundationally, it's about curiosity and about also recognizing the importance of the craft and the importance of making sure that the engineering team has a great environment. So I think typically where product managers tend to not have good relationships with engineering, it is because they underinvest in the platform itself and
Mm,
in tech debt, right? And making sure that that doesn't accrue too much, and or in making some pretty bad assumptions based on like what might be easy or difficult to do because they don't understand what's actually going on under the hood, right?
mhm,
And so whenever I'm coming into a new organization, a new group, I just recently started working with our algo product management team. They're
mhm,
now reporting to me. I'm like, I want to learn, right? So hey, can I have some sessions? I just want brain dumps and just be able to like see like what is the architecture. I want to understand how data flows. I want to understand what are the like skeletons in the closet, where are the limitations of the system, and our current capabilities, so that way I can help to advocate for here are the things we really need to invest in if we've
mhm,
underinvested in them, but also I can help sort of identify, oh, here's where we've got a lot of leverage, and it's not hard to experiment here, it's not hard to invest there. So I've spent hours understanding like the flight system at Expedia and how it works and whatnot, and now the algorithms at Netflix. And I think just having that curiosity, asking questions, being humble, being very interested in understanding their perspectives is the foundation in my experience.
So you mentioned Expedia. That's an interesting company in that I guess it seems more like a travel company that's powered by technology, or is that unfair? Do you consider Expedia a technology company that happens to do travel, or?
Well, I mean, it's a marketplace, right? It's a
Yeah.
digital marketplace where you've got sort of that combination of you have to have a ton of supply, which then makes the demand component work. And the demand component is ultimately what brings in the supply. So you kind of have to keep both of those sides of the equation in balance and top of mind. But yeah, I don't. I think they're more of a commerce company than anything, right?
Mhm.
It's about traffic generation, conversion, and ensuring that they've got competitive supply and prices and so forth. Which supply in travel and particularly in lodging, is super hard because it is not an aggregated supply environment. It is a lot of like mom and pops, vacation rentals, tiny hotels. But look, if you're going to a remote island, there may only be 10 hotels, right? And so
Mhm.
having a selection there is going to be pretty critical. And if you don't have inventory, that causes consumers not to choose your service. So,
And what was the approach to product management at Expedia when you compare it to, the previous companies that you had worked?
yeah. I mean, I was on the supply, I was on the consumer side,
Mhm.
right? So the demand side. And ultimately, there it's around a few things. One is we ended up doing a really significant push while I was there on performance.
Mhm.
When you are doing these like really complex searches, flights are a perfect example of this, like super complicated to get flight options. When you're looking across different carriers and across different potential itineraries, there are like a ridiculous number of combinations that are possible to get from here to there. And really kind of making that query something and it's all real time priced too, right? So it can't like be from a cache or anything along those lines. So performance really key,
Mhm.
but it was ultimately about sort of setting up for customer success, for making sure that they felt that they found great savings, they felt like they saw those and understood those savings, and they were able to get successfully to their vacation. A lot of people invest a ton of time and energy in planning vacations. So it's a pain point there. But if you are able to unlock, like a find for them,
Mm-hmm.
you get incredibly positive response. So that was really satisfying.
Were there any kind of lessons learned or tips or tricks or approaches to product management that you discovered at Expedia that you brought with you as well?
That's an interesting point. I mean, I think there I really came to appreciate the importance of the supply side of a marketplace. And that's not lost on me as well at Netflix. It's,
Mm-hmm.
their creators choose to come to our platform or others. And so making sure that at the end of the day, I do think, and Amazon held this philosophy pretty strongly, that, the consumer is the prize, that if you get the consumers to choose your platform, then the suppliers will come and will
Mm-hmm.
will participate. But it is a balance, and we need to make sure that that there's a good value exchange for both in that. So I think kind of keeping that in mind, balancing it, and in terms of how you think about promotion and what you're recommending to a consumer,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of it also comes down to how does this help to keep the supply environment side of the marketplace healthy.
Yeah, that must have been a very delicate balance.
Yeah, it
Um,
can be.
Tell me a little bit about the move to Netflix. Like, so you've been at this point, you're at Expedia. You've been in Seattle forever.
Forever.
You get this call or some contact at some point from this very, also iconic but very kind of unique company. How did you think about that opportunity?
For sure. Well, I mean, I was immediately drawn to Netflix because, like many people, I had, come across the culture deck, the
Mm-hmm.
culture memo some time ago, and I was super intrigued, right? Like
Yeah.
they operate so differently. And there's a part of me that, in addition to like really wanting to build great products that impact customers' lives and make them a little bit better, there's also a part of me that's kind of an academic, kind of wonky. I like
Mm-hmm.
studying things or understanding things, and so like this really different model of leadership and management was hugely curious to me. And I naturally found that many of the stated culture aspects at Netflix just resonate with me entirely. I'm a very candid person. I think probably uncomfortably candid for many people. And on the west coast of the United States, we've got a fairly passive aggressive
Mm.
culture by and large. People, you'll be in a meeting, everybody kind of nods and it's like, oh, great idea. And then they all leave and they're talking to each other, going like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like,
Yeah.
that's never going to work, right? Like, that drives me nuts. And so this idea of being like radically candid and
Mm.
transparent was really appealing. Um, it was a little bit of it was a little bit that I was walking away from, though, not only Seattle friends and family and like that aspect, which of course is material, especially as my kids were in middle school and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's like it's either do or do not at that point, but I don't really want to
Mm-hmm.
be moving around when they're in high school. Um, but also I had a great team and environment at Expedia. I was managing at that point, again, engineering,
Mm.
fairly large team, over 100 people, and I felt really good about that I was learning and enjoying the environment. But I have to say that the call to learn from working with this really high, what at Netflix is called high talent density, like a lot of really smart people, and really engaged and interesting people that I could learn from. With much more of a focus on inclusion and diversity than other companies that I'd been able to work at, and so that was really appealing. So even though it was kind of like downscoping to be back to product management and quite a bit smaller team, I felt like this was too great of an opportunity to pass up. And I used a little bit of Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I felt like if I didn't make the leap, if I didn't come down here, I probably would have regretted it.
And what was that like the first, 90 days in this very unique environment and very special company?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely so Netflix prior to joining, right, had a reputation of being somewhere that was pretty aggressive in letting people go, right? Like
Mm,
that's kind of part of the original culture memo was, you know, yeah, okay performers or good performance, not great performance, get a generous severance, right?
mm.
And I'm like, oof, like I've just moved my entire family down to the
Yeah,
Bay Area, so I was honestly very very nervous. I was like, I don't know, like I think I'm pretty good. I think I'm smart. I
right.
think I know what I'm doing. Been successful for the most part to date, but so there was insecurity from that. But I did. That's just not what I found when I got here. I feel like people have been really supportive and um, like yeah, it's not sort of like what I was worried about is somewhat of a having to watch my back, cutthroat kind of
Mm,
culture, and definitely not the experience. I was yeah, pleasantly surprised that it's a much smaller organization than I would have thought from the outside. Our technology team is not that big. I oversee product management for the member experience, right? So pretty
mhm.
much after sign up, everything that you're going to experience on your mobile apps, your TV, your web, the kids experience, messaging, etc. And within those UI components, that's a 6-person product management team. That's it, right? Like
That's pretty lean.
it's pretty lean, right?
Yeah,
It's really different. The product management model there is super different. And I
yeah.
kind of love it, but it does it poses a problem when I'm trying to hire, which I am at the moment, that like I don't have like even for my directors, I don't have like a giant team you get to manage. You have to roll up
Mm.
your sleeves and do it yourself. But the good news is you've got like huge area of impact to work with.
So how does that work get done? Because when you describe that scope, 6 is not the number of product managers I would have assumed. And
Yeah.
so, like, who how are they getting all this work done? Like, who's doing the work that, let's say, a traditional tech company might have 26 or 36 people
Yeah.
doing that kind of scope?
Yeah, that's
Who
right.
Yeah.
So it's all predicated on part of the Netflix philosophy to date, which has been we don't hire people who are junior, right? We don't hire people fresh out of college on
Mm,
any discipline, really. But most notably, of course, we spend a lot of our time with engineers to a certain degree, designers and data scientists and so forth, and all of those folks that we're working with are folks who have at least a few years of experience. And here's what's also key is the Netflix model means we're trying to like cream off the very strongest in each of those disciplines.
mm.
And as you don't no doubt know, I mean, right, like when you work with an average developer versus an outstanding one, it can
Yeah.
easily be like 5x 10x
Yeah.
productivity, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the goal, right? Is that you find those folks, you pay them nicely, they're surrounded by other people who they believe to be really high impact and that they can learn from as well, and then you give them a bunch of autonomy. And so as a product manager, it's not that we're super hands off, but you're dealing with so many fewer people.
Mm,
They're all located on West Coast time zone, so we're not having to deal with like, oh well, we've got to wait until they wake up the next day and work on this
mhm.
to turn the idea. Um, and because you're working with more experienced designers and developers, you don't have to get into the like really detailed, requirements and acceptance criteria and those sorts of things, right? You can lean on the folks that you're working with to work with ambiguity and to be able to, sort of fill in the gaps in terms of the things that they have experience in doing. And also, and this is important, knowing when to escalate. Because if you're working
Mm.
with somebody who's quite junior, they may just make it up, right? And if they start making stuff up, that can even be worse. So yeah, like you're working with people who have really good judgment around how best to utilize product management time. So
Do you also have, I would imagine, a much lower kind of administrative burden in terms of documentation and reviews and,
yeah,
OKR grading and OKR status updates and all that good stuff?
yeah, we don't do OKRs, so that helps for sure. We don't do big. Well, it's arguable as to whether or not it helps, but I think certainly from a time and
Mm,
energy perspective, we don't have centralized decision making. it's fascinating. Like I am the VP of product, right? For member experience. I make very few decisions. Like I actually make almost no decisions about what tests we're running, what the product actually looks like, the design. I'll offer my opinion, but I don't get to make the call. So this is where the context, not control, comes in, right? It's like we have a mechanism by which the decisions I make are more at sort of a portfolio level, like how many people roughly should be working on this problem space versus this other one. And if those things end up coming into conflict in terms of a scarce resource within the company, which one should maybe get the first stab. But for the most part, yeah, I don't make product decisions. And it's kind of it's that is definitely a weight off of me, is knowing that ultimately it's the product manager who gets to make those calls. I'd say that we have a pretty good mechanism by which to get input. So every week we've got what we call our product strat forum. I think the invite list is up to 1,000 people, but at the end of the day, only 100 or so join. But it's a memo-based review, and product managers sign up for chunks of time. So 20 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour or more, whatever they think is appropriate for the conversation. And they offer a memo up. It could be their roadmap. It could be a test idea. It could be results from a test that were really interesting that they want to share. And we all read the memo ahead of time, and then have a nice, robust conversation and get that. It's just a super efficient way to get a bunch of people's input. And then ultimately they're the informed captain to make choices as to how to move forward based on that input.
So let's take an example where you're at that meeting and some PM says, yeah, I'm proposing this test, and in your opinion, it's a very wacky idea. And you try and kind of provide input that, have you thought about this, or what about that? But they're just like adamant that they want to run this test.
Yeah.
Do they still, like, how much leeway do they have?
They have a lot of leeway. They actually have a lot of leeway. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, I've been wrong before. I could be wrong. Like, let's go for it, and let's see what the data shows in terms of how our members react. Now, there are situations where it's like, well, no, actually, that would do a lot of brand harm, or that I think that is, to use an Amazon expression, a one-way door. You go out there, it's going to be really hard to reverse it if it turns out to be wrong. Things like it's not in my area, but price changes, like that, new rate plans, like those are really hard to reverse. And so you want to be really thorough about your research and making sure it's a good thing to make those changes. So there are occasions where I'm going to like really kind of put heavy pressure to say, like, I think this needs to be rethought. But by and large, in those situations, I'm not alone in that chorus, right? Like at this product strat meeting, you've got 100 people going like, that's a stupid idea, right? And there's wisdom in crowds, right? There's wisdom in crowds, especially when you've got a more tenured employee base, people with experience on their own, and then also experience at Netflix, means that you're likely to get those warning signs pretty clearly. And you hope that a product manager is going to react to that. And if somebody's consistently not listening to feedback and making lousy decisions, then yeah, their job is not going to be secure, I would say.
Earlier, you mentioned two concepts that I thought, oh, that's interesting. How do you harmonize them? Radical candor and also inclusivity. And I wonder, like, wow, if you're in that meeting of 100 people and they're like piling on, telling you that your idea is terrible or not great, like how do you make sure it's a psychologically safe environment and people feel heard and part of the team?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think it is something to balance, especially across cultures, right? So I think I would like to think that in the product team, as we are, we built up a culture of it's not ad hominem. It's not about the person. It is about the idea and the aspects of the idea and the execution of the idea, that where everybody should have a large, sort of a large serving of humility, myself included, about like, look, we often are wrong. Like that's why you experiment. If in most of the mass market consumer testing I've done, like you're lucky if you're right 30, 40%
Yeah.
of the time,
Right.
right? A lot of times you're going to be an equal number of times you're going to be wrong and or neutral, which is, unfortunately, probably the worst situation
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't really learn anything one way or the other. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that, but I do think that as you talk about like making that a safe environment for other people to participate in and feel like they can chime in and get their perspectives heard, I think it can be a challenge. Interestingly, I think being remote, work from home, has helped in that regard on a few levels. So it used to be that you had to physically attend that product strat meeting in Los Gatos, right? So if you happen to work in another market, yeah, you can comment on the memo, but you can't actually participate in the conversation. We also used to have, I also just think that the ways in which people kind of can queue up with their hands raised in video conversations now, you don't tend to have as much of the cult of personality or same few people dominating the conversation. You actually will get like a greater diversity of voices. So yeah, I think that, and I have to say, like having that combination of a written document where people who are not particularly not particularly, or might be shy or might not feel confident about English as their first language or whatever it may be, that they can participate very actively in the conversations in the margins, as opposed to having to talk in front of large groups, which can be certainly very uncomfortable for some.
You and I work in tech, which is generally highly represented by men, and you're a female leader at one of the great tech companies out there. I'm curious, what advice do you have for women product managers who are maybe earlier in their career? And would it be any different than advice you'd give to kind of any other product manager? Or are there specific things that you think women product managers should consider as they operate and grow?
Yeah. I look, I think it's a great job for women in particular, because I think that product management requires that combination of problem solving, analytical skills, et cetera, but also relationship skills, communication skills, empathy, right? Like these all end up, especially over time, becoming quite important as you're trying to influence and get people on board and excited, and help get people energized by your vision, right? So having said that, though, I think specific advice. Look, it's it is probably true that women are not as likely to self-advocate and to raise their hands and take on new opportunities without being asked, and that's true of other underrepresented groups as well. And I think that's the instinct that you really have to be willing to fight, right? You have to be willing to say, like not have 100% confidence that you're going to succeed and still go for it, because that is oftentimes how you get career advancement opportunities. It's how you get to know more people in an organization. It's understanding that, like, yeah, you may not understand all aspects of this technology or all aspects of the problem space that you're going to go into, the industry or otherwise, but that you are willing to fake it until you make it, and give it a shot, and that everybody's going to be learning in what we do. So that one, I think, is worth looking out for and making sure that you kind of get good coaching and advice. And I think a lot of people will give you encouragement to make smart risks with your own career and the types of projects you take on.
If you could travel back in time and give yourself some advice as an early product manager based on what you've learned at all these amazing companies, what would be some things that you would tell yourself about what it takes to be a great PM?
I think I would probably tell myself to chill out a bit. I think I was pretty intense early on. I still can be now, but probably a lot less so. Experience tends to kind of calm you down in a lot of respects, because you can get through things and that not everything's
Mm-hmm.
a crisis. I definitely wish that I had taken the advice earlier of a colleague of mine who eventually told me, Keela, you got to take vacations. You got to take a break. And
Mm.
because, you'll never remember what were you working on in January 2022, right? Like it all becomes a blur, especially if you're at a company for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to remember that vacation to Belize and the photos you took and the crazy things that you did with your family or your friends. And those are memory builders, and those are really important to do, and to help balance yourself as well. So I think that is, something that it took me too long. I almost had a weird pride in letting like vacation days expire, which is just kind of ridiculous in retrospect. And then, additionally, and my hope would be folks who are listening to this conversation, that they're already on this track, is to invest some time in your own professional development, your own kind of thinking and broadening your thinking, right? So I've done a lot more in more recent years of listening to audiobooks and going for walks, right? And
Mm.
just like listening about different industries and businesses, different leaders and their styles, things along those lines that I think really help to, oftentimes spark that creative idea, that solution, because you can help to develop analogies to other types of business problems in the past that can be very helpful. So I wish I'd done more of that early.
Yeah. I think a lot of us went through those various phases during our career. And yeah, I certainly remember taking pride in being a bit of a workaholic. And
Totally.
now I look back and I'm like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's a generational thing, and like,
Yeah, it
folks who
could
are a
be. Yeah.
little younger are like, yeah, that's inherently stupid. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, I think
But
maybe, subsequent generations have a more healthy point of view on those things.
I agree.
Tell me a little bit, like, if you fast forward 10 years and you're now in let's say in a different role, a different company, what are some lessons from Netflix that you'll bring with you in terms of how you lead or how you think about product management?
I really would bring with me this concept of having fewer people on the
Mm,
team. Big teams is not better. It doesn't necessarily help you. It certainly slows you down in many respects, adds a lot of complexity. That even if you're really excited about solving something, it's better to get fewer amazing people to solve it, than to throw a whole bunch of people at it.
yeah, I remember when was at Microsoft and then later joined Google the first time. And the ratios of PMs to Eng were much different. And Google was relatively leaner than Microsoft. And I remember my Microsoft colleagues saying, like, how is that possible? How do they only have, like 2 or 3 PMs on all of Gmail? And when I was at MSN and Hotmail, we had like an army of planners and program managers and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe I guess what you're seeing is like you can do it with even less and do it better potentially.
Well,
With
it, it
yeah.
it forces the hard choices, right? It forces you
Mhm.
not to pursue all of the great ideas. I
Mm.
mean, there are lots of things that can force, or create that forcing function, but I think it does mean that people get a lot more satisfaction out of their jobs when they've got a nice sort of like broad area of autonomy, and I think it gives a lot more satisfaction to the engineering role, because then they can lean in and be thought
Mhm.
partners and be part of the formation, of ideas as well. So, I think that overall I think it's a little bit unfortunate that technology companies have thrown off as much cash as we have, because then it becomes really easy to just solve it with people and hire and grow, really aggressively, and that's not always the right call.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is super thought provoking, and I greatly appreciate you, Keela, for spending time on the show to kind of share your perspectives and the benefits of your experiences at all these amazing companies, and really appreciate you giving all of us some advice here.
Oh, well, you're absolutely welcome. And thank you for having this forum, right? I know just over the course of my career, I get a lot of requests from people who want mentorship, who want to understand, how they can continue to grow in the field and learn some best practices. And it's tough, right? Because like I can't actually mentor a whole bunch of people, and so having these opportunities for one-to-many conversations and be able to impact many people's lives, I want to encourage you to continue to do that, because I think you're really giving a gift to a lot of people in doing that.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I enjoy these conversations, and the fact that then we can make it available to everybody else out there. I imagine there are PMs out there who will probably be a little more successful because of the time you spent with us today. So, thank you again, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
See ya.